My family hurt my child and expected me to stay silent. Instead, I took her to the hospital, pressed charges, and ended their perfect lives. Sophie, my daughter, is 8 now. She's healthy and thriving, and she doesn't recall much from that day 3 years ago. The doctor stated that her youthful age helped her with memory suppression. I am grateful for that mercy, even if I will never forget a single moment. Because context is important. Let me start from the beginning. My family has always used a golden child approach. My older sister Isabel was the crown jewel. She married Adriana Lauren, a corporate lawyer, had 2 children, and lived in a beautiful suburban home with a pool. Meanwhile, at 24, I became a single mother after my ex boyfriend abandoned me the moment I told him I was pregnant. I worked 2 jobs to keep our tiny apartment, got my nursing degree with night classes, and raised Sophie on Resolve and microwave dinners. My parents made their preferences obvious with 1,000 little cuts. Isabel's children received savings bonds for birthdays, and Sophie received $10 gift cards. Isabel's family was prominently featured in Christmas photos, with Sophie and I positioned at the frame's edge. My mother would groan whenever I described my difficulties with childcare, but she would drop everything to babysit Isabel. I persuaded myself it did not matter. Sophie had me, I had her. We were sufficient. However, youngsters did notice things. Sophie began to question why Grandma usually hugged her cousins longer. Why did Grandpa play games with Julie and Elena and Lucas, yet seldom talked to her? I made excuses because I wanted her to have a family other than simply myself. That July Sunday began as any other compulsory family gathering. My dad was cooking in the backyard. My mother was obsessing over Isabel's delicious potato salad. Adrian was preaching about interest rates to anyone who would listen. The kids were racing through the sprinklers, yelling with a delight that only children can have. Sophie was being very good. She'd always worked especially hard at these meetings, as if she could earn their love via flawless behavior. She shared her toys without complaining. When Julian grabbed her favorite plastic unicorn, she said please and thank you. She even complimented my mother's clothing, prompting a distracted pat on the head. Then something happened. Elena, who is 9 and has inherited Isabel's cruel streak, decided she wanted Sophie's cupcake over her own, which sat untouched on her plate. Sophie's cupcake, particularly. Sophie had been saving it, eating her sandwich first, as I taught her. Sophie moved her plate back as Elena went for it. That's mine, Sophie remarked gently. You have your own. Elena's face flushed. She grabbed the platter nonetheless. Sophie held on. The plate flipped, and chocolate frosting sprayed across Elena's white sundress. Everyone fled due to the screams. Isabel emerged first, snatching up Elena as if she had been attacked by wolves. What did you do? She sprang at Sophie with such ferocity that I moved between them. It was an accident, I stated confidently. Elena tried to take Sophie's cupcake, and now you're calling my daughter a liar, Isabel said, her voice as sharp as glass. Elena replied, your brat threw food at her. That's not what happened. I maintained my tone. I watched the whole thing, my mother said, already siding with Isabel, before hearing the entire story. For heaven's sake, Clara, can't you control your child? Look at Elena's dress. That's ruined. It's frosting. It'll wash out. I glanced to Sophie, who was transfixed with horror. Honey, go inside and wash your hands, my father yelled across the yard. She's not going anywhere until she apologizes. He'd arrived with his beer and his habitual scowl, which he saved for me and Sophie. Dad, she doesn't need to apologize for defending her own food. He jabbed a large finger at me and said, don't talk back to me. You've raised her with no discipline, no respect. She's going to apologize right now, or I'll teach her some manners. Something icy slid down my spine. You're not teaching her anything. We're leaving. I reached for Sophie's hand, but Isabel grabbed my wrist. You always do this. You can't just leave every time your kid acts up. She needs to learn consequences. Let go of me. I wrenched my arm free. My father moved faster than I imagined for someone his size. He grasped Sophie's shoulder before I could respond. She yelped in agony as his fingers dug in. Dad, please stop. I tried to pull Sophie away, but my mother grabbed my other arm. Let him handle this, she screamed. You clearly can't. Handle what? She's 6 years old. I screamed, straining against my mother's grip. Isabel had stepped behind me and pinned my arms back. My father dragged Sophie towards the home. She was crying and pleading for me, and I was struggling with everything I could muster, but my mother and sister were stronger together. Adrienne merely stood there, watching with his phone out, most likely recording for eventual legal protection. Your trashy little thing needs to learn manners, my father said aloud. He struggled with his belt buckle, releasing the leather off his waist. Pure horror flooded my system. No, Dad. Please stop. He raised the belt. Sophie received the first strike across the back. She yelled. I felt something snap inside my chest, something fundamental and irreversible. The second strike struck her legs. She tried to cuddle up in a ball, still crying for me. Stop it. Stop it. I was kicking, biting, and doing anything I could to break free. My mom slapped me across the face. Be quiet. You're making things worse. This was the third strike, the fourth. Sophie's cries were becoming weaker. The fifth strike hit her across the shoulders. She collapsed. The strikes landed on her petite form, and she fell silent. Complete silence. Great work, Dad. Isabel's voice was full of admiration. She released my arms as if it were a routine Tuesday afternoon. Now, she won't disobey my kids. My parents crowded around Isabel as if she had spoken something meaningful. My father was breathing heavily as he buckled his belt again. My mother was already brushing Isabel's hair, muttering about how they'd never injure her angels, and how they knew how to raise children correctly. I stood there free, finally, with my entire body shaking. Sophie was not moving. She was laying on the grass like a broken doll, her small sundress tattered and crimson stains spreading throughout her body. My mother looked to me with winter-like eyes. Pick her up and get out. You've messed up our relationship with your sister's family. Never step foot in this house again. I moved forward on legs that did not feel connected to my body. I crouched beside Sophie and grabbed her in my arms. She was breathing, albeit in short breaths. Her eyes were closed. She had a cut on her forehead from where she had fallen. I rose up, clutching my kid, and looked at each of them individually. My father is still smirking. Isabel is already scrolling on her phone. My mother remained stone-faced and unyielding. Adrienne tucks his phone aside. Elena Julian and Lucas watched from the porch as if this were entertainment. I didn't say anything. I carried Sophie to my car, carefully fastened her into her car seat, and drove straight to St. Mary's Hospital. The ER doctor took one look at Sophie and summoned a full trauma team. In minutes, we were besieged by nurses, pediatric specialists, and a social worker. They cut off her dress. They documented every mark, bruise, and welt on that belt. Someone counted 12 different impact sites. Sophie's injuries were photographed by a nurse who was overcome with emotion. She repeatedly apologized to me as if capturing the evidence made her culpable. I squeezed her shoulder and assured her that she was assisting us. Every photograph she took was another nail in my father's coffin. Dr. Helena Fisher, the attending physician, walked me to the corridor as the team continued their assessment. She was younger than I imagined, around 37, with piercing eyes that missed nothing. Your daughter has significant trauma, she stated simply. Apart from the evident contusions and lacerations, I'm concerned about internal problems. She suffered a concussion as a result of the impact to her head from falling. We need a CT scan to rule out any bleeding or swelling in her brain. We're also looking for renal injury and internal bleeding from the hits to her torso. My kneecaps buckled. Dr. Fisher grabbed my elbow and guided me to a chair. I need you to stay strong for her, she added firmly. Sophie needs to know you're here fighting for her. Can you do that? I nodded and forced oxygen into my lungs. Yes, whatever she needs. Good. Now I need complete honesty from you. Has this happened before any previous injuries, or episodes of physical discipline from family members. My father has always been rough around the edges. I confess, the words tasting like ash. He would sometimes hold Sophie's arm too firmly or snap at her in an overly aggressive manner. But he had never hit her before. I swear, if I had known he was capable of this, I would not have brought her there. Dr. Fisher took notes on her iPad. The social worker will require this information. I'm required to report suspected child abuse, and this goes beyond suspicion. This was documented, photographed, and observed. The authorities will become involved whether you want them to or not. I want them involved, I declared vehemently. I want everyone involved. I want him arrested and prosecuted, and I want everyone to know what he did to my baby. Something changed in Dr. Fisher's expression. Perhaps respect or recognition for a mother's finally unleashed rage. Then we'll make sure you have everything you need to make that happen. Sophie awoke as they were examining her. She was bewildered and in pain when she called for me. I held her hand while they worked, murmuring that she was secure now that I had her, and that no one would ever harm her again. The social worker pulled me aside. Her name was Annalise Weber, and her eyes were compassionate, but had plainly seen too much. I need you to tell me exactly what happened. So I did. Every detail, word, and moment. I was held back while my father beat my 6-year-old daughter for refusing to give up her cupcake. We're calling the cops, Annalise explained. This constitutes terrible child abuse. Your daughter has a concussion, several contusions, and perhaps internal bruising. She is being admitted overnight for observation. The police arrived an hour later. 2 detectives, Amelia Novak and Daniel Petrovich. I recounted the story again. They recorded notes, images of Sophie's injuries, and my statement. They asked if anyone else had seen it. My whole family watched. I answered hollowly. My mother and sister were holding me back. My brother-in-law, Adrian Lauron, recorded some of it on his phone. Detective Novak's expression darkened. Well, need his phone. Detective Petrovic leaned forward, his voice calm, yet demanding. Clara, please walk me through the timeline again. Every detail matters to the prosecution. Begin from the moment you arrived at the residence. So I did it again. The cupcake, Elena's outburst, Isabel's quick defense of her daughter without seeking questions. My father escalated his verbal threats to physical assault. My mother and sister forcibly restrained me. Adrian Laurent is standing there with his phone out like a spectator at a sporting event. You said your mother slapped you, Detective Novak observed. That is assault. We'll be charging her as well. I don't care about me, I said. I care about Sophie. I don't mind that they restrained me and forced me to watch him beat her unconscious. We care about everything, Detective Petrovich informed me. Every charge we can make stick is another guarantee that this will not happen again. Your brother-in-law, Adrian Lauron, recorded this. He mumbled something about documenting the discipline that was taking place. I believe he hoped it would provide some protection for them, prove they were only correcting poor conduct. Detective Novak and Petrovic exchanged looks. People always think they're smarter than they are, Petrovich complained. The video will either exonerate or convict them. According on what you've told us, I'm betting on the latter. They visited my parents' place that night. My father was arrested for criminal child abuse. My mother and Isabel were arrested for restricting me and serving as accomplices. Adrian Laurent turned over his phone after detectives informed him that deleting evidence was a crime. The footage was damning. My father beat a kindergartner, while 2 women held back the screaming mother, all on video. Adrian Laurent stated that he had filmed it expressly to demonstrate that punishment was taking place. He believed it would provide legal protection for them. Instead, it determined their fate. The next morning, Detective Novak returned to the hospital to give me an update. She sat by Sophie's bed, fatigued but grimly content. We watched the video. She whispered quietly, aware of Sophie sleeping nearby. All of it. 52 seconds of footage that will plague me throughout my career. Your father's lawyer is already attempting to spin it as appropriate discipline. That went too far, but the prosecutor isn't buying it. We're going for the maximum charge. What does that mean? My voice was from crying rage and exhaustion. Felonious child abuse resulting in serious bodily damage. If convicted, he faces a sentence ranging from 6 to 14 years. Your mother and sister have been charged with felony child abuse assault and false imprisonment for detaining you. Adrian faces false imprisonment and possible obstruction depending on what he does with that footage. He has already given you his phone. He did, however, we're looking into whether he uploaded or provided the footage to anyone. If he shared it with family members or attempted to use it to justify what occurred, he might face extra penalties. Detective Novak took out her notes. I also want to ask you some unpleasant questions regarding your family history. Has your father ever been violent? Have there been any domestic violence incidents? Is there any history of aggression? I reflected on all of my childhood memories. He punished us as children, but nothing compared to what he did to Sophie. He was often angry and yelling. He threw objects when he was angry. Plates, tools, whatever was available. He smashed a hole in the wall once when Isabel arrived home after curfew. When I was 16, he gripped my wrist so hard that it left bruises. And I spoke back to him. Has anyone reported these incidents? No. My mother was always smoothing things out. She said he had a temper, but he didn't mean it. That he had worked hard and earned respect. Looking back, she was helping him, making excuses and sheltering him rather than protecting us. Detective Novak scribbled swiftly. This pattern of activity supports our case. It demonstrates that this wasn't a unique incident. It is who he is. The district attorney will want to conduct a more formal interview with you regarding this background. Whatever you need, I replied. I will testify. I will give depositions. I'll stand in front of a jury and tell them everything if it's necessary. It might come to that, she cautioned. Defense lawyers may be ruthless. They will try to portray you as a bitter daughter. Claim you're exaggerating due of previous family issues. They'll claim Sophie was out of control and need correction. Can you handle that? I gazed at my daughter, small and shattered on the hospital bed, with machines monitoring her vitals and bandages covering her wounds. I can handle anything if it means protecting her. But I wasn't finished. Arrests were only the beginning. While Sophie slept in her hospital bed, I made phone calls. I called my boss at the hospital where I worked and said that I needed to take family leave immediately. I called my landlord and informed him that I would be moving. I contacted Beatrice Morrow, a lawyer who specializes in family law and victim advocacy. Before calling Beatrice, I spent an hour researching attorneys on my phone while sitting next to Sophie's bed. I read reviews, looked up case histories, and looked for someone who was known for being utterly merciless when it came to safeguarding victims. Beatrice's name kept recurring. She had successfully sued the entire school district for failing to safeguard a pupil from abuse. She'd bankrupted a daycare center whose employees had concealed injuries. She didn't only win cases. She annihilated those who harmed children. Her consultation charge was $220, which I didn't have, but I was willing to max out every credit card I had, if necessary. Beatrice and I met at the hospital the next morning. She examined everything, including the video Adrienne had taken. Her face remained professional, but I noticed her hands shaking when the fifth strike struck. I'm taking your case pro bono, she explained. And I'm going to make sure they pay for this in every possible way. Beatrice was in her early 60s, with silver hair tucked into a tight bun and eyes that would likely make seasoned judges uneasy. She wore a navy suit that exuded expertise and carried a leather briefcase that appeared older than I was. Pro bono, I repeated, convinced I had misheard. But your consultation fee alone is waived along with everything else. She placed her briefcase on the little table in Sophie's hospital room and took out a yellow legal paper and 3 pencils. I run a very successful practice, Clara. I take cases like yours when they matter, and I don't charge for them because money isn't the most essential factor in these situations. What matters is justice. What important is that your daughter is safe and that those who mistreated her understand they chose the wrong family to victimize. Tears welled in my eyes. Since arriving at the hospital, I've been making mental calculations about how high my medical expenses would be, how I'd afford an attorney, whether I'd need to take out loans or file for bankruptcy. The relief of having someone knowledgeable on my side for free almost broke me. Thank you, I muttered. Do not thank me yet. What comes next won't be easy, Beatrix said, clicking her pen. The criminal case is moving forward, which is wonderful, but I'm going to file a civil suit in which they will lose everything they own, your parents' sister, and their husbands. We're chasing all of their assets, including their property and retirement accounts. They'll wish that the criminal charges were the worst thing that happened to them. How does that work? Can we sue while the criminal trial is ongoing? Absolutely. Criminal and civil cases go in simultaneously. The criminal case establishes guilt and prison sentence. The civil lawsuit establishes financial liability and reimbursement for damages. We will use the criminal conviction to strengthen our civil case, but we do not need to wait for it. Beatrice began writing on her legal pad. Tell me about their financial position. Do your parents own the house? Yes. It is paid off. They purchased it 28 years ago. It's probably worth approximately $450,000 currently. Good. That is an asset we can pursue. Your sister and her husband own a house with a mortgage. Adrienne made a solid living as a business lawyer. I don't know their actual financial situation, but they live comfortably. Private schools for the kids, new cars, and country club membership. Even great people with assets have something to lose, Beatrice wrote quickly. This week, I'll file a restraining order to keep them away from you and Sophie. Then comes a legal lawsuit for assault battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligent supervision. We will identify all 4 of them as defendants. Negligent supervision. Your sister and Adrienne let their children be present during a brutal assault. They exposed their children to trauma that is legally actionable. Beatrice looked up from her notes. What age are Isabel's children 9, 7, and 5? Elena, Julian, and Lucas. Aged enough to be traumatized. They are young enough to require long-term therapy, which your family incidentally caused. I will urge that CPS evaluate Isabel's suitability as a parent. The notion of Isabel being subjected to the same scrutiny she'd always avoided gave me a wicked delight. She had spent years presenting herself as the ideal mother, the model parent. She'd have to answer for condoning child abuse in front of her own children. While Sophie healed for a week, Beatrice obtained a restraining order against my parents, Isabel and Adrian. She brought a civil complaint for assault battery, emotional distress, and intentional infliction of emotional harm. She filed formal complaints with Child Protective Services regarding Isabel's suitability as a parent, considering that she had condoned child abuse in front of her own children. Sophie's hospital stay lasted 6 days. The CT scan revealed cerebral enlargement, but fortunately no hemorrhage. Her kidneys were bruised but otherwise functioning correctly. The doctors kept her under surveillance, administering pain medicine and monitoring her neurological responses. On day 4, she was alert enough to watch cartoons and eat applesauce. By day 6, she was requesting to return home. I seldom left her side. I slept in a fold-out chair given by the hospital, waking up only when a nurse arrived to check my vitals or administer medication. My boss, a lovely woman named Franciscoca, sent me a care package containing snacks, a blanket, and a message, encouraging me to take as much time as I needed. Co-workers donated their PTO hours so that I wouldn't lose money. The nursing community cares for its own. On the 4th day, my phone began ringing with unexpected numbers. I ignored them until I received a voicemail from someone claiming to be my Aunt Monica, my mother's sister. Clara, honey, this is Aunt Monica. I just learned about what happened, and I'm completely terrified. Your mother contacted me from jail to ask for aid with bail. And when she explained why she was arrested, I hung up. I want you to know that I am entirely on your side. If you need anything, money, a place to stay, or someone to watch Sophie, call me. What they did is unforgivable. I saved the message. Then I rescued the 3 others from relatives who had learned about the arrest and were taking sides. My father's brother, Uncle Stefan, left a note saying, "My brother had always been a bully, and he wasn't surprised it had escalated to this." My cousin Ali, Isabel's age, said she'd testify about how my parents had always preferred Isabel over me. Family splits occur along fault lines, and it appears that my father's aggression was one of them. The restraining order was granted immediately. My parents, Isabel and Adrienne, were not allowed to come within 500 feet of me or Sophie. The hearing for the restraining order took place without me present. Beatrice handled the situation with the judge while I stayed at the hospital with Sophie, but she called me later to let me know how things turned out. The judge took one look at the medical records and photos and granted a 6-year restraining order. Beatrice informed us. He said, and I quote, "Anyone who beats a 6-year-old unconscious has forfeited their right to family contact. Your father's attorney tried to argue it was an overreaction, and the judge threatened him with contempt. 6 years, that was longer than I had hoped. It could be extended if needed. Restraining orders are frequently issued in cases involving child abuse." But here's the interesting bit. Adriana's law firm dismissed him this morning. Apparently, having an attorney prosecuted for false detention is terrible for their reputation. Who knew Beatrice's voice was filled with sarcasm? They've already fired him. The trial hasn't even started. Morality clauses in job contracts are lovely things. His firm includes a rule concerning how an attorney should conduct themselves. Being arrested and charged with facilitating child abuse qualifies. He's been legally terminated, thus his income has reduced to 0. I felt a flash of fierce ecstasy. Good. Things get better. Isabel's country club became aware of the incident and terminated her membership. Apparently, other members have threatened to leave if she is allowed to stay. She has also been asked to step down from the PTA at her children's school. How do you know all of this? I have a paralegal that is excellent at obtaining information. Also, your sister made the mistake of posting a diatribe about being persecuted on Facebook, which turned out about as well as you'd anticipate. People began circulating news articles about the arrests. She's been receiving death threats. I should have felt awful about it. Perhaps the old Clara would have, but the new Clara who had witnessed her daughter's beating couldn't feel any sympathy. Is she in danger? I doubt that the threats are serious. Only keyboard warriors, but she's locked down her social media, which suggests she's beginning to realize the repercussions of her conduct. The criminal trial proceeded extremely quickly, taking only 10 months from arrest to trial, which is unusual for felony cases. The video footage and the blatant nature of the crime sped up the process. My father pleaded not guilty, stating that he was only disciplined and unruly youngster. His lawyer attempted to argue for parental rights and traditional discipline. The prosecution lead by Associate District Attorney Katarina Vogel dismantled that defense. She was a woman in her 40s with a steel spine and a special goal to combat child abusers. When she was young, her own brother perished as a result of parental violence. According to courthouse chatter, the defendant is not the child's parent. Vogel stated during opening remarks, he is the grandfather. He has no legal right to punish this child. Even if he did 12 hits with a leather belt that caused unconsciousness, concussion, and serious bodily injury is hardly disciplined. It's an assault. It's a battery. It is a crime. The jury was given a video. Several members clearly reacted. A woman covered her mouth. A man in the back row shook his head frequently. Sophie's screams rang through the courtroom speakers, and 2 jurors wiped their eyes. I testified on the 3rd day.
Đây chính là
The
thực
defense
lực và
counsel
nội tình
Victor
của thế
Schumann,
lực đỉnh
who
tiêm,
appeared to
mà đệ
regret
tử
taking
tinh
on this
anh
case,
thì là tiểu đế
attempted
tôn
to
cảnh
present
giới bắt
me as
đầu.
an overly dramatic,
Đến tiểu đế
spiteful
tôn
daughter.
mới có thể tấn thăng làm đệ
Isn't
tử
it
tinh
true
anh của
that
Thanh
you've
Dương
had a
Thánh
rocky
Địa.
relationship with
Đến
your
mức
parents
thánh
for
tử.
years? He
Hiện nay,
asked.
trong Thanh Dương Thánh Địa,
Yes,
5 vị
I
thánh tử,
replied
mỗi
honestly.
một vị đều là cảnh
They've
giới
always
tiểu đế
favored my
tôn ngũ
sister
trọng
over
trở
me and
lên.
treated my daughter as
Hắn
less
Lý Nhàn
important than
Ngư
her
vừa
cousins.
vặn là tiểu đế tôn
And isn't
ngũ
it
trọng,
true
được tôn
you've
là
been
thánh
looking
tử,
for a
thời
reason to
gian
cut them
ngắn
out of
ngủi,
your life?
căn cơ không sâu.
No.
Thậm chí lúc nào cũng có thể
I
đối mặt
kept
sự
bringing
khiêu
my
khích
daughter
đến từ
around,
đệ tử
hoping
tinh
they'd treat
anh.
her better,
Có thể là lần này,
hoping they'd
đến
love her
tiểu
the
đế
way
tôn thất trọng.
grandparents should.
Điều này hoàn toàn có thể
My
sánh
voice was
vai với 4
rasping.
vị thánh tử kia.
I gave them
Đa
several
tạ sư
chances to
tôn.
be kind to her.
Lý
They
Nhàn Ngư
chose
kích động
cruelty.
không thôi. Lúc
But
này,
you admit
sắc mặt
there was
Tần Trần
existing
có chút trắng
animosity.
bệch, nói, tốt,
I
những
admit
năm gần
I was
đây,
stung by
ngươi
their
tiến bộ rất
favoritism.
nhanh,
I do
thế
not
nhưng nhất
admit
định
that
chịu
I made
không
up
ít
what
khổ.
happened.
Linh khí thiên địa của
The
Chu
video
Tam
does
Thiên
not
mạnh
lie,
hơn,
Mr.
tu
Schumann.
hành tự nhiên nhanh
You have
hơn.
seen it?
Nhưng là,
Everyone has
năm
seen
đó
it.
Lý Nhàn Ngư tiến nhập Trung Tam
My father
Thiên
beat my
chỉ là
6-year-old
một vị
daughter
vương giả cảnh
unconscious
thực lực
while my
thôi.
mother
Tại
and
Trung
sister
Tam Thiên
restrained
vượt
me.
qua thánh nhân cảnh
That
giới,
occurred.
đến tiểu đế tôn,
No amount
không
of
cần
implying
nghĩ,
I'm
nhất
dramatic
định là ăn
alters
rất nhiều
that truth.
khổ. Về sau tại Thanh Dương
Katina
Thánh Địa,
Vogel
nếu có người
grinned
khi dễ
as I
ngươi,
stepped down.
đừng kìm nén, sư phụ
The
đòi
jury
lại công đạo
deliberated
cho
for
ngươi,
90
hiểu
minutes,
chưa?
guilty on all
Sư
counts.
tôn yên tâm, không ai dám.
When the verdict
Tần
was
Trần
read,
lại
my
nói,
father's
ngươi
face
đừng
became
khoe
gray.
khoang, ta không chỉ là
My
quan tâm
mother,
ngươi,
who was
ngươi
seated in
cũng
the
là đồ
gallery,
đệ của
began
ta Tần
sobbing.
Trần. Bị người
Isabel
khi dễ,
sat
cái đó
stone-faced
cũng là
beside
mất
her,
mặt
most
ta.
likely calculating
Lý
her own
Nhàn Ngư
trial
mỉm
outcomes.
cười, nhẹ gật đầu. Chuyện
Sentencing
được đọc
occurred
bởi
2
kênh
weeks later.
Halazy Audio.
My
Lúc
father
này,
was
Diệp
condemned to
Nam
5
Hiên ra
years of
tới,
state jail.
nhìn về phía Tần Trần.
My mother
Thành
and
khẩn
Isabel
nói,
both
sư
received
tôn
20
người
months
xem,
for their
thiên
roles.
đao pháp thân của ta. Gần đây
Adrienne
mới vừa làm được tình trạng hiển
received a
hiện bên
9-month
ngoài,
sentence
đại
and a
thiên
large
tôn sơ
fine
kỳ,
for false
ta cảm
imprisonment.
giác cũng có vấn đề, gửi
Katerina
cho ta
Vogel
xem một
had
chút.
fought for the
Ta
maximum
cũng vậy,
on all
ta cũng
charges.
thế. Lý Huyền Đạo
My
vội
father
vàng
received a
nói.
5-year term
Tần
because
Trần
the
liếc
judge
hai người một
recognized his
cái,
age
lập tức
and
cười
lack of
cười
past
nói,
criminal
cút.
record.
Hai gã này, từ
However, he
khi
made
tiến
it
nhập Trung
obvious
Tam
that if it
Thiên,
had been up to
cơ
him
hồ đều
alone,
ở dưới mí
the
mắt mình tu
penalty
luyện,
would have
có
been
vấn đề
longer.
cái lông gì? Nghe được
Mr.
lời nói này,
Bauer
hai
Judge
người đều run
Henrik
run cười
Keller
một tiếng.
replied,
Nhàn
looking
Ngư
over
có
his
thể tiến nhập
spectacles at
tiểu
my
đế
father.
tôn, tại Thanh Dương Thánh Địa
I have
thành
been on
thánh
this
tử,
bench for
là bước
25
ngoặt
years.
của hắn. Đồ đệ của ta
I've
Tần
witnessed a
Trần,
lot of child
không có
abuse
ai thua
incidents.
kém những thiên chi kiêu
What
tử khác.
distinguishes yours from
Tần
many
Trần mang
others
theo một tia
is the
ngạo nghễ
brutality
nói,
of your attack
hai người các ngươi,
and your
thực
complete
lực bây
lack of
giờ không
remorse.
quá đủ, cũng thiếu rèn luyện,
You've
cả ngày
demonstrated
đều
no
ở bên cạnh
accountability
ta,
or
cũng không phải biện
comprehension of the
pháp.
hurt you
Ta
caused.
đã nghĩ kỹ.
You blamed a
Tần Trần
6-year-old
chậm rãi
youngster
nói,
for your own
đợi đến
conduct.
sự việc ở Cửu Châu an bài
That
tốt,
tells me you're
ta sẽ
exactly
đi
the
tới
type
Thánh
of
Đạo
person
Tông,
who should be in
đồng thời
prison.
bái nhập bên trong Thánh Đạo Tông.
My father
Một
attempted
số
to
chuyện
speak,
ta
but
cần
Judge
phải đi
Keller
điều
raised his
tra.
hand.
Hai người các
I
ngươi,
am not
ta cũng
finished.
nghĩ kỹ. Tần Trần
Your
cười
daughter
tủm tỉm
tried to
nói,
shield her child
sinh
from
ra ở
you,
Cửu Nguyên Đại Lục,
but you
địa
still
vực vạn
damaged the
dặm,
youngster.
hạ hạt thành trì cùng võ giả
You
các
created
loại.
a traumatic
Hơn 10
brain
ức,
injury.
ta chuẩn bị làm
You
linh
left
gia lần này
permanent
thu phục
scars,
xong
and when
Cửu
you
Châu về
finished, you
sau,
felt proud of
liền
yourself.
trực tiếp tiến nhập chỗ ở của
The
Lăng
video
gia,
captures you
Lăng gia thành
smirking,
linh gia.
smirking at
Đến
what
lúc
you had
đó,
done
không tránh
to an
khỏi chém
unconscious
giết,
kindergarten.
hai người các ngươi cứ ở
The
lại linh
judge's
gia
voice
chém giết là
increased.
được.
5 years in
Không
state
muốn tiểu
prison,
đế tôn,
followed by
đừng
8
tìm
years
ta.
probation,
Nghe đến lời
with
này,
mandatory
hai
anger
người đều một
management
mặt không nỡ,
and parenting
nghĩ đến mấy
classes.
vạn năm sư phụ,
Though I
còn chưa
doubt
ở
you'll
chung
ever be
bao lâu
trusted
đâu,
near a
lại
child
phải chia
again.
xa,
My
đương nhiên
mother
không
and
nỡ.
Isabel were
Lý Nhàn
convicted
Ngư lập tức
simultaneously.
nói, địa lý của Lăng gia
Judge Keller
nằm ở
was
biên cảnh
equally
phía
tough
bắc
on
của
them.
Cửu Nguyên
You
Đại
two
Lục,
claimed you
Cửu
were
Châu
trying
ở
to
phía
prevent
bắc
the
Cửu Nguyên
situation
vực,
from
chúng ta một
escalating,
đường hướng nam,
remarked the
vừa vặn
judge.
có thể đến.
But the
Chỉ
evidence
là
indicates
Thanh
that you
Dương
were
Thánh
active
Địa nằm ở phía
participants.
nam Cửu Nguyên Đại
Mrs.
Lục.
Bauer,
Lý Nhàn
you
Ngư
hit your
nhìn
own
về phía
daughter
Tần Trần,
when she asked you to
nói,
stop her
sư
father
tôn không
from
bằng
hurting
tiến
her
nhập Thanh
child.
Dương Thánh Địa. Ta đến
Miss
bên trong
Isabel
Thánh Đạo Tông,
Laron,
có
you
chuyện
praised
muốn
the
tra,
assault.
liên quan
You
đến ma
praised it.
tộc, có khả năng còn liên lụy
That kind
đến
of
là ai đối
brutality
phó
to your
linh
own
gia,
niece is
cùng với Trần
unbelievable.
Nhất Mặc rốt cuộc ở nơi nào.
Isabel's counsel
Tần Trần
attempted to
nhịn không
plead
được
for
nói,
leniency on
năm
the
đó
grounds
thu
that
nhận
she had
đồ
young
đệ,
children who
chính là
needed
nghĩ
her.
đến, lần nữa trở
Judge
về,
Keller
ta có
remained
thể dựa vào
unmoved.
đồ đệ, đại hiển thần uy,
Your children
nhưng
saw
bây
you
giờ, lại
facilitate
xong rồi,
and praise child
tìm đồ
abuse.
truyền.
That is
Trình điều
exactly why
truyền.
Child Protective
Lúc
Services
này,
is
Diệp
involved in
Nam
your
Hiên hơi
case.
đỏ mặt.
Perhaps 20
Lý
months in
Huyền
jail
bảo đại
will
thản
allow you
nhiên.
to think on the example
Hắn cũng
you've set
không
for
để sư
them.
tôn tìm, mà là chờ đợi
Adrienne's
sư tôn
sentence
trở
was almost
về. Các ngươi
anticlimactic.
yên tâm đi.
9
Tần
months
Trần
for
lần
false
nữa nói,
incarceration
ma
with a
tộc, linh
$60,000
gia,
fine
trên nhất
rendered
mặt,
him
ba
pale.
chuyện này không đơn giản
His
như
public
vậy.
defense
Ta ở
attempted
bên
to
trong thánh
explain
đạo
that he
tông
was simply a
sẽ ẩn náu
bystander
xuống, chậm
who
rãi
made the
điều
wrong
tra.
decision to video
Ẩn
rather
náu.
than intervene.
Đừng nói.
He was a
Tính
bystander
tình
who
này của
chose
sư tôn
documentation over
đến bên trong
decency.
thánh đạo tông.
Judge
Đoán
Keller
chừng lập tức
explained,
sẽ thành đệ
as a
tử
lawyer
đỉnh
he knew
tiêm của
better.
thánh đạo tông.
As a human being,
Lý
he ought
Nhàn
to have
Như tiếp
known
tục
better.
nói, Thánh Đạo Tông cùng Thanh
9
Dương Thánh
months,
Địa giống
but
nhau,
prison time was
đều là đại
insufficient
thế
for
lực
me.
truyền thừa lâu đời,
I wanted
yêu
them to
cầu thu
feel the
nhận
same
đệ
sense of
tử
grief
cũng
I
không
did
kém
when
nhiều.
seeing my
Trên
daughter
đệ
be
tử
beaten
tinh Anh
unconscious.
cũng có 7 vị yêu nghiệt thanh danh hiển
Beatrice
hách
was an
là
expert
các
at
đạo tử.
financial warfare.
Đệ tử ở
She
bên
went
trong
for
Thanh
everything.
Dương Thánh Địa hiểu rõ tin tức
The civil
cũng
trial
không
started
nhiều.
6
Sư
months
tôn
after the
ngài cũng
criminal
biết người
convictions.
này của ta.
By
Không thích
then, my
hấp người
parents
nghe
had
ngóng.
virtually depleted their
Ta minh bạch.
resources on legal
Tần
bills.
Trần vỗ vỗ vai
They
Lý
had taken
Nhàn
out a
Nhi,
second
cười
mortgage on their
nói,
property,
tiếp
which had
theo,
been paid
ngươi
off
hãy
for
lưu
many
tâm nhiều
years,
hơn những
to
chuyện
pay
liên
for my
quan đến
father's
cửu
defense
nguyên đan
attorney.
điển, liên
Isabel
quan
and
đến Trần
Adrienne.
Nhất Mặc. Trần Nhất
Laurent
Mặc này
had
là một
depleted
gã
their
đàn
joint
si,
accounts, sold
hơn nữa rất
Adrienne's
thiện
high-end
luyến.
automobile,
Lý Đan Thuật,
and were
hắn
late
chuyện
on their
gì cũng
mortgage
làm được.
payments.
Diệp Nam Hiên lười nói
Beatrice
ngay, vậy
sensed
chẳng
blood
phải
in the
giống như
water.
Ôn Hiến Chi, khờ.
Here's what
Tần
we're
Trần
asking
liếc nhìn
for,
Diệp Nam Hiên,
she stated at a
nói
strategy
người khác
meeting.
khờ, chính ngươi thì tốt hơn
Medical
chỗ nào.
expenses for Sophie,
Được
past,
rồi,
present,
tản đi thôi,
and
ngày
future.
mai bàn tiếp. Tần Trần
This
khoát
includes
tay,
her
ba người lần
hospitalization,
lượt rời
continued
đi.
therapy,
Lúc này,
and any
Tần
expert
Trần
she
bước
may
đến trước
require.
cửa đường, nhìn xem
We
linh vị
estimate
của hai vợ chồng Linh Thư và
$220,000 in
Lý
medical
Thanh Huyên.
costs over the next
Cha,
12 years.
mẹ, Tần Trần thì thầm, Linh gia hiện tại
$220,000.
xem như đã nắm giữ Cửu Châu,
My mouth became
mọi
dry.
việc đã được chỉnh đốn ổn
A
thỏa.
conservative estimate.
Hải Nhi sẽ đưa Linh gia tiến
Trauma
vào Cửu
therapy
Nguyên
is
đại
not
lục.
cheap, and
Thời
Sophie will
gian có
require
hơi
it
gấp
far
gáp,
into her
nhưng Nam
adolescence,
Hiên
if
và
not
Huyền Đạo
longer.
sẽ ở lại đây. Hải Nhi
Then
tin
we
tưởng
ask for
hai người
anguish
họ
and
có thể
misery.
trấn giữ. Trước hết để
Your
Linh
and
gia
Sophie's
đứng
missed
vững gót chân
salaries,
tại
both
Cửu Nguyên
past
đại
and
lục.
prospective,
Hải Nhi nghĩ,
have had an
một
impact
khi
on your
Linh gia
job
bắt đầu khôi
advancement.
phục thế quật khởi, những kẻ lén
Emotional
lút muốn
grief
đối phó
and
Linh
punitive
gia chắc chắn
penalties
sẽ không
to
ngồi
punish
yên.
them for their
Đến lúc
behavior.
đó, là ai hãm hại
How
Linh
much
gia,
total I am
là ai
seeking
giết cha mẹ,
for
Hải Nhi nhất
$2.5
định
million.
sẽ điều tra rõ ràng. Hải
I
Nhi
hope to
có thể sẽ
receive
tạm thời
between
rời khỏi Liên Nguyên Châu,
$700,000
một thời
and
gian sẽ không
$1.1
trở về
million,
thăm hỏi nhị lão.
depending on the
Hy
verdict.
vọng nhị lão đừng chờ mong.
$2.5 million.
Nói xong, Tần Trần trầm mặc hồi
The
lâu,
figure was
dập đầu
astonishing.
hành lễ,
They do not
mới rời
have
khỏi từ đường.
$2.5 million,
Lúc này, Thời Thanh
but they
Trúc
have
đi theo Tần
assets that we
Trần,
can
trở
seize.
về lầu các trước đó
Your
ở
parents'
lại.
house retirement
Đến nửa
funds
đêm,
and any
Diệp
savings
Nam
or
Hiên và Lý
investments.
Huyền Đạo tự nhiên là lôi kéo Lý Nhàn
Isabel
Nhi
and
uống một trận
Adrienne's
rượu, thêm sâu tình cảm.
home,
Nói về Ôn Hiến Chi, Bạch Cảm Đương,
automobiles.
Dương Thanh Vân cùng đám người, ba người
Adrienne's
cũng dần dần quen
401k
thuộc nhau.
and
Mấy ngày sau đó,
Isabel's
Lý Nhàn
inheritance
Ngư
from your
làm quen
grandma.
với thực lực cảnh
We
giới
will take
mới.
all we can,
Lý
and if
Huyền
they are
Đạo và
unable to
Diệp
pay
Nam
in
Hiên hai
full,
người, mỗi ngày cũng
we will
cùng nhau
garnish
đối
their
luyện.
paychecks for
Sau
the
10
rest of their
tháng,
life.
Linh
The
Thiên
civil
Phương,
trial
Linh Thiên
moved
Chiết,
faster
Linh Thiên
than the
Minh,
criminal one.
Hồng Phù Dung, Hồng Đào,
The guilty
Khương Ung
convictions
cùng
in the
đám
criminal
người
case
đều đã trở
performed
về.
the majority
Đại
of the
đường nghị
work
sự của
for
Linh
us.
gia. Đám người
We
tụ
only had
họp
to
tại
prove
đây.
damages, which was
Nửa
simple
tháng
with
qua,
medical
tất cả
bills,
nơi của ngạo thế
therapy
đường và tề
invoices,
gia đều đã
and
bị trấn
expert
áp.
evidence.
Hiện tại, Cửu Châu xem
Sophie's
như đã an
therapist,
ổn,
Dr.
nhưng
Matthias
đều là
Kleen,
dựa vào vũ lực trấn áp.
testified to her ongoing
Muốn chân
trauma.
chính thống nhất, còn cần thời gian
Sophie
từ
has
từ rèn luyện.
nightmares 3 to 4 times
Linh
every
Thiên
week.
Phương và mấy người bắt đầu
She
lần
feels
lượt
uneasy
kể
with
về
older
những chuyện
guys,
xảy ra trong
especially
nửa
those
tháng
that
qua.
resemble her
Tần
grandfather.
Trần cũng chăm chú lắng nghe từng
She has to
lời.
miss school on
Hắn
sometimes
không ra
because of
tay,
panic
nhưng rất
episodes.
quan tâm đến những
Her
chuyện này.
trauma will take years
Điều
of
này liên
consistent
quan
therapy
đến
to
căn cơ phát
process.
triển hàng trăm, hàng
Dr.
nghìn, hàng
Fisher
vạn năm của
testified
Linh gia
regarding
trong tương
Sophie's
lai,
injuries
không thể xảy ra
and their
vấn đề.
long-term effects.
Rất lâu sau, tất
The
cả công
concussion
việc
she
đều đã được
sustained
trình
can
bày
have
xong.
long-term implications
Tần
on
Trần gật
cognitive
đầu,
development.
nói, những nhân
We
vật
will
quan
not know
trọng
the
của
full
ngạo thế
damage
đường
for
có thể
years.
giữ lại.
The
Sau này
scars
dựa
on
vào
her
hiệu
back
quả
and
mà quyết
shoulders
định.
are permanent.
Nếu không được, dần dần
I
diệt trừ.
testified about the
Còn những
financial
người của
hardship,
tề
the
gia,
emotional
những
toll,
kẻ cốt lõi
and
thì
Sophie's
giết đi.
reaction when others
Lời
raised
này
their
vừa nói
voices.
ra, tất cả mọi người có mặt đều biến
Beatrice
sắc.
went me
Thân
through
thể
every
Khương Ung
incident,
run lên.
presenting a picture
Hắn
of
biết
widespread
rõ,
devastation
năm đó,
produced by
Khương
a
gia
single
giết người của
afternoon of
Linh gia,
violence.
cha Tần Trần là Linh Thư bị
The defense
thương.
argued that we were
Nhưng Tần
asking for
Trần
too
cho
much
dù tức
money,
giận, cũng
that
chỉ
my
giết
family
những
did
võ
not
giả
have
cao
such
tầng cốt
riches,
lõi của Khương.
and that we were attempting to financially destroy them out of spite. They destroyed themselves. Beatrice responded in her concluding argument, "My client is merely seeking reimbursement for the harm they did. They decided to beat a child. They chose to facilitate and celebrate the beating. They chose to place their own egos over a young girl's safety. They now have to pay for their choices. That is not spite. That is justice. The jury gave us $900,000. Not the full $2.5 million, but enough to bankrupt them. My parents had to sell their home to cover legal bills and the initial civil judgment. A young couple from Italy bought the house they had raised us in, but it was filled with images of Isabel's perfect family. My parents relocated to a tiny apartment in a bad neighborhood. Aunt Monica told me that my mother grieved for for days as they packed up to go talking about how unjust it was, how they'd lose everything for one small error. Aunt Monica explained that beating a child unconscious was not a mistake. It was a decision. My mother stopped calling her after that. The house sold for $475,000. After paying off their second mortgage for legal bills, court costs, and the realtor, they contributed around $200,000 to the judgment. The remainder of my parents' payment came from liquidating my father's 401k, which had approximately $280,000, and my mother's IRA, which held approximately $15,000. My parents paid for the judgment with their home and retirement assets, totaling about $585,000. Isabel and Adrienne Laron were responsible for the remaining $315,000. Their home went into foreclosure, but before the bank repossessed it, they negotiated a short sale that won them approximately $48,000 after their mortgage was paid. Adrienne's 401k held $92,000. Isabel's inheritance from my grandmother was $72,000, which she kept in a separate investment account. Their automobiles, jewelry, and other possessions were liquidated for an additional $28,000. They were able to raise approximately $240,000, leaving them with an outstanding balance of $35,000, which would be deducted from any future earnings. Their retirement security and carefully crafted existence have all been destroyed. Isabel's life collapsed spectacularly. Adrienne Laron's law business sacked him the instant the conviction appeared on his record. No law firm wants an attorney with a criminal history for false imprisonment. He was unable to find job in the legal area. They had to withdraw their children from private school. The luxury home went into foreclosure. The foreclosure happened quickly. Without Adrienne's income and growing legal fees, they missed 3 mortgage payments in a row. The bank began action. They attempted to sell before foreclosure would affect their credit, but houses take time to sell, and they were out of time. I heard more from Adrienne's younger brother, Nicholas, who came out to apologize on his family's behalf. Nicholas had always been decent. He'd actually spoken out at a family gathering once when my father was being really harsh with Sophie, and he'd received a lecture about minding his own business. They're moving in with Adrienne's parents, Nicholas told me over coffee. His mother and father own a 3-bedroom home in Spain. Adrienne, Isabel, and 2 kids share 1 spare bedroom. It is going to be hell. They made their own choices, I remarked without sympathy. I understand. I simply wanted you to know that not everyone in the family believes you are incorrect. What they did to Sophie was horrific. Adrienne should have stopped it. Instead, he shot it like a sociopath. Nicholas testified at the civil trial discussing Adrienne's inclination to prioritize his personal interests over ethics, as well as Isabel's history of condoning unethical behavior in order to maintain her place as the favorite child. His testimony contributed to the pattern of neglect and brutality that marked my family. Better, CPS extensively investigated Isabel. Having your children witness you facilitating child abuse and cheering it is likely to trigger warning flags. Her children were temporarily placed with Adrienne's parents while she completed mandated parenting lessons and a psychological evaluation. Mutual acquaintances told me about the glances she received around town, the gossip, and the ostracism from her country club connections. The civil litigation was a masterpiece. Beatrice went for everything, even my parents' retirement funds, and Isabel and Adrienne Laron's residual possessions. The judgment was $900,000, which included Sophie's medical expenses, therapy fees, my lost wages, pain and suffering, and punitive damages. They couldn't pay right away, but we had legal means to collect. Bankruptcy loomed. My mother had to return to work at the age of 62 this time as a clerk at a budget store. My father would leave prison and return home with little. Isabel and Adrienne. Laron's marriage disintegrated due to financial pressure. They filed for divorce 9 months after their trial. I took Sophie and relocated 3 hours away to a smaller city where I'd been offered a position at a better hospital with superior benefits. We made a fresh start. New housing, new schools, fresh beginnings. Sophie started therapy with Dr. Matthias Kleen, a wonderful child psychologist who specializes in trauma healing. Sophie healed slowly and gently. The nightmares occurred less regularly. She smiled and played again. She made acquaintances at her new school who had no idea what had happened. She's joined a soccer squad. She laughed as I tickled her. She was still my Sophie only, with some wounds that could never fade. My mother contacted me from an unknown number one day around 2 years later. I banned all of their contacts, but she had become clever. Clara, she remarked when I responded. Her voice sounded elderly and worn down. Please, we need to talk. We have nothing to discuss. Your father is getting out in 2 years. We have nothing left. Isabel's marriage is over. Her children barely talk to her. Can't we find a way to go past this? I didn't feel anything while responding. You held me down while your husband was beating my daughter unconscious. You instructed me to pick her up and depart. You prioritized Isabel over your granddaughter's safety. There is no getting around that. Is she fine now? Children are resilient. We have lost everything, Clara. Everything. Do you have any compassion? Sophie has scars on her back that will never fade. She has nightmares in which she reaches out for me, but I can't reach her because you and Isabel are holding me back. She cringes when outsiders raise their voices. But sure, she is alive and recovering, which is more than you deserve. We're your family. You stopped being my family the moment you decided hurting a 6-year-old was acceptable. I paused to ensure she heard every word fully. Sophie is my family. You are merely people who share my DNA. Lose my number. I hung up and blocked the new number. My mother tried to reach out to other relatives. I also shut that down. Anyone who urged that I forgive or forget was promptly gone from my life. I formed a new set of friends who recognized that safeguarding your child is not optional. Isabel attempted to send a letter from Beatrice's office. Beatrice forwarded it to me with a letter stating that I did not need to read it. I did it anyhow. It was 6 pages of self-pity, blaming me for ruining her life, and claiming that what happened was not serious, and that I had overreacted. I shredded it without responding. The most pleasant moment occurred approximately 2 years following the occurrence. I was at a coffee shop near my new job. When I ran into Gabrielle, an old family acquaintance, she had attended the cookout but had to leave early due to another commitment. She had heard everything that transpired subsequently. Clara, my God, she exclaimed, grabbing me into a hug. How is Sophie? She is good. Very good. Actually thriving. Gabrielle smiled with real affection. I'm very happy. I, testified at the trial. I told them how your parents always favored Isabel, and how I'd witnessed your father be rough with Sophie at previous parties. You did? Of course. What they did was awful. She gripped my hand. I also want you to know that no one from our old circle speaks to your family anymore. Last month, your mother wanted to join our reading group, but 3 individuals walked out. She is not welcome any place. Neither is Isabel. That truth nestled in my chest like warm honey. I hadn't sought for that level of social justice, but knowing that their community had turned them down felt appropriate. Thank you for testifying, I said. It helped. I just said the truth. That is all any decent person would do. Sophie and I are enjoying our lives right now. She is now in 2nd grade, playing soccer and learning to play the piano. Her buddies come over for sleepovers and birthday parties. She continues to meet Dr. Matthias Klein once a month to check in and process things as she grows and gains a better understanding of what transpired. Sometimes she asks about her grandparents. I keep my responses age appropriate and honest. They made some terrible decisions that affected you, so we don't see them anymore. Our goal is to keep you safe. Do they miss me? She inquired once. I think they probably do, I responded cautiously, but missing someone doesn't fix what they did wrong. She thought about it, nodded, and returned to her coloring book. I still have difficult days. Days when I recall those moments in the backyard where I felt my mother's hands on my arms and heard Sophie scream. On those days, I recall myself of what followed: justice, protection, and the new life I created for us. People occasionally wonder if I regret how hard I pursued my family. The solution is straightforward, not for 1 second. When it came down to it, they showed me who they truly were. They prioritized harshness over compassion, image over integrity, and convenience over conscience. They harmed my child and asked me to accept it. Instead, I ensured that they recognized that their actions had repercussions. Real, long-term, terrible repercussions. My father is imprisoned and has lost both his freedom and his dignity. My mother, who is in her 60s, works for a minimal pay and barely makes ends meet. Isabel's ideal existence has been shattered into bits that she will never fully reconstruct. Adrienne's career is over. Every day, they bear the consequences of their decisions. Meanwhile, Sophie and I are creating something wonderful out of the ashes of that dreadful day. We have tranquility, we have safety, we have each other, and to be honest, that is the best form of vengeance. They believed they could break